day so far. I know a lot of great discussions have been happening, both in terms of at lunch and at the workshop sessions and here this afternoon, this morning. This afternoon's plenary session is really focused on the basic systems that provide us energy and water and allow us to communicate and get from place to place. There's no doubt that America faces huge challenges when it comes to our infrastructure. There's also no doubt that we need to take drastic actions to repair it. To get this done, we need strong leaders who are ready to tackle this challenge, and I'm pleased to introduce one of those leaders right now. Our keynote speaker this afternoon is Tim Berga, president of the Ohio AFL-CIO. The Ohio AFL-CIO represents 500,000 union workers from 40 affiliated international unions in the public, private, and federal sectors of employment. Tim began his work with the Ohio AFL-CIO as legislative director in 2002, and in September 2014, delegates of the Ohio AFL-CIO convention unanimously elected Tim to the office of president, a seat he has held since January 2011. Prior to his work at the Federation, Tim worked for the city of Marion, Ohio, where he assisted in a successful effort to organize city workers to be represented by the United Steelworkers. Tim went on to become the vice president and president of Steelworkers Local Union 7856. After working for the city of Marion, Tim spent 9 years on Capitol Hill lobbying on workforce training issues. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tim Berga, president of the Ohio AFL-CIO.
Good afternoon. For those of you outside of the state of Ohio, welcome to the Buckeye State. I won't go into my long commentary about why Cleveland needs to win a sports championship. I already did that with utility workers last week. So 146 sports seasons without a championship in the city of Cleveland, but I'll get past that. Maybe just yet we can bring a victory home this year. So, BlueGreen delegates, my sisters and brothers inside the labor movement, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. The labor and environmental movements are unique, but we have much more in common than we have in differences. Working together, we can ensure that new energy jobs of today and tomorrow create middle-class job opportunities in manufacturing, generation, and distribution. Leaders in the labor movement have recognized this and have built a coalition that is vital to achieving our goal of a stronger, fairer, and more prosperous America. As a third-generation steelworker, it's my privilege to introduce Leo W. Gerard, International President of the United Steelworkers. He leads the 1.2 million members and retirees in the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean. The United Steelworkers proudly represent men and women who work in nearly every industry there is. Our members are leaders in our communities, in our workplaces, and in government, and they're fighting for better workplaces, better lives for everyone, and a better world. Leo is the son of a union miner, and his leadership and vision has helped bring more than 300,000 new members into the ranks since taking office as international president in 2001. Under his direction, the United Steelworkers has filed more trade law complaints than any other union or any single company. In general, these complaints seek sanctions against foreign companies that receive illegal government subsidies and dump products in U.S. markets at predatory prices. He's a member of the AFL-CIO Executive Committee as well as serving on its Executive Council. He is also a board member of the AFL-CIO Transportation Trades Department and chairs the AFL-CIO Public Policy Committee. He's a co-founder of the BlueGreen Alliance and serves on the boards of the Campaigns for America Future and the Economic Policy Institute. Please join me in welcoming one of the most innovative and progressive labor leaders in the world, International President of the United Steelworkers and my brother, Leo Gerard.
To tell you the truth, I'm always amazed by these introductions. And if my mom and dad were here, my mom would be really proud And my dad would say, don't believe that bullshit. But today I'm actually here to tell you that the path to achieving economic prosperity and environmental progress can reside right here with us. 10 years ago, the United Steelworkers joined with the Sierra Club to create the BlueGreen Alliance. We did so with the belief that we don't have to make the false choice that Secretary Perez talked about. It's not good jobs or a clean environment. In the long run, it's going to either be both or neither. And we need to understand that, and we need to insulate ourselves from the false choices. I do want to say that often people have asked me over the last 10 years since the creation of the BlueGreen Alliance, what are the steelworkers doing in this? Why are you in the BlueGreen Alliance? And I need to tell them very candidly that we're not Johnny-come-latelys to this. We held our first environmental conference in the Steelworkers Union in 1963. And at that time, we understood that whatever went out into the water system, whatever went out into the air, actually was being digested or ingested by our members in our workplaces. So the first thing we had to do in order to clean up the environment was also clean up our workplaces. And we were proud that we did that. But let me be clear that we have an opportunity now to rebuild the infrastructure of this country. And when we talk about rebuilding that infrastructure, we have to talk about what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean ignoring our water systems in our cities so that people end up drinking water that's lead-filled. I just read recently, in fact, just this afternoon, that there's 33 cities in 17 states where it's been identified that their water testing system excludes the test for lead. That's a shame. That shouldn't be. We have to make sure that we tell them that rebuilding our infrastructure doesn't mean signing lousy, rotten trade deals that not only export our jobs, but import their pollution from places like China and Korea and others. It doesn't mean that we ignore impacted workers and impacted communities as we move to renewable energy. It means we invest in repairing and modernizing our infrastructure systems, from water, from energy, from pipes. And it does mean that we should be looking at the low-hanging fruit of retrofitting our public buildings. Did you know that 70% of schools are more than 50 years old? They're using antiquated air handling systems. They've got glass that doesn't insulate from the cold or the heat. That could be repaired. The majority of our public buildings are more than 75 years old. The same thing would apply. We have water infrastructure that my friend Mike Langford tells me we waste a billion gallons of water per day. How many of us know what a billion is? A billion is 1,000 millions. Do you have any idea what that is? I have no idea what that is. The way I look at it is I was told once to look at my watch. And I was told that if I look at the second hand, 1 billion seconds ago, we lived in caves. Now, to me, that's a big number. And we lose 1 billion gallons of water a day. That's low-hanging fruit. We could fix the environment, we could create jobs. We look at leakage in our other systems. Methane leaks. Again, I'm told there's 500 methane leaks a day in D.C. I think some of that shit got into some Republican heads, but that's another one. It certainly means that we should be negotiating trade deals that protect our jobs. We should be negotiating trade deals that give us a balanced trade agenda. We should be, go ahead. It should mean that when we rebuild our infrastructure, whether we're rebuilding roads, bridges, airports, pipes, buildings, we're doing that with things that are made in America and are meeting our legal obligations to the world by manufacturing those things here and doing our work here. I don't know how many of you saw, digress for a minute, how many of you saw 60 Minutes last week when they talked about the Bay Bridge in San Francisco to Oakland. 6 years overdue, and billions of dollars over budget. Why is that? Because somebody said we couldn't do that. There was no fabricating facility in America that could do it. So we farmed it out to China, and we helped China build a fabricating facility because they had no fabricating facility prior to that that could do it. They did that. Then we used their steel, which, by the way, on average, is 3 to 4 times more, I was going to use a bad word, 3 to 4 times more pollution in it and more carbon emissions than any steel that's made in North America. And not only that, it was inferior. When it came, it couldn't hold the weld. So we had to send it back. And we had to send American engineers to show them how to do that. So in the end, we have a Bay Bridge with no American jobs, years over budget, and inferior. We need to take a stand, and I think BlueGreen is the right institution for us to do that. We take a stand of demanding that as we move to a clean economy, that we do it with jobs that can sustain families, can give people a decent life, and can give them the kind of retirement where they can retire with dignity. I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of hearing this language that we can't rebuild our infrastructure, and it mostly comes, and excuse the politics, it mostly comes from the political know-nothings who still, as a majority, don't believe, they're still climate deniers and don't believe that climate change is in fact occurring. We need to make sure that we take the initiative, and we're going to have an opportunity this fall to unelect all the climate change deniers, to put in place to put in place a long-term infrastructure modernization program. When you hear them debating about, quote, the damn highway bill or the transportation bill, where they're going to approve it for 2 years, no one is going to invest in trying to build a factory in 2 years when you don't know if that's still going to be there. I know it from personal experience. Governor Ed Rendell, when he was governor in Pennsylvania, passed a renewable energy standard. Within that passage of his renewable energy standard, we attracted one of the world's top wind turbine manufacturers. We ended up with the steelworkers representing 1,400 people on a former U.S. Steel site. When his replacement came, a Republican Governor Corbett, he wiped out the renewable standard. Today we have nobody on that site. We might have a few people repairing blades that were part of a guarantee. But we lost 1,400 jobs. What if we had a national renewable energy standard? What if we had that renewable energy standard not just for wind turbines and solar, but for rebuilding our political infrastructure in our public buildings? Most, as I said, public buildings are more than 70 years old, and there's millions upon millions of jobs there. So we should be looking at how we do that. We need to be the voice that's going to facilitate the change. Look it. It's amazing sometimes. I treat myself to saying that sometimes so you can look forward, you got to look backwards. And when I look backwards, when we announced the formation of the Blue-Green Alliance and we signed a one-page document, the Sierra Club and the Steelworkers, Carl Pope and I, we were arrogant enough to do it at the Washington Press Club. I think about 8 people showed up. Me, Foster, Carl Pope, each of us bringing one staff. That brought us up to 6. And 2 reporters that wanted to know what the hell was the Sierra Club doing with the Steelworkers Union, and what's this alliance? I think one of them was drunk and the other guy was looking for free food, you know? So if you look backwards, people were wondering, what the hell are we doing? But if you look to where we are now, 10 years later, we have the capacity through the Blue-Green Alliance to be the rational voice for progressive change, for dealing with climate change, for dealing with carbon emissions, for dealing with a future where our kids won't have to breathe in dirty air or drink crappy water or drink water that may have other contaminants besides lead because we didn't monitor it properly. and have the best water treatment systems in the world. Most small towns don't even have a damn water treatment system. So there's a huge amount of opportunity here to build the kind of society that we can all be proud of. I'm tremendously proud of the fact that the Blue-Green Alliance is that vehicle. I congratulate Dave Foster whenever I see him, and now I congratulate Kim Glas for the terrific work that she and her staff are doing, getting the message out and making the fight that we need to fight. We need to have a climate change bill. We came close. We came close when we had a Democratic majority. There were a couple of Democrats that were a little bit wayward, but we came close. I really believe that if the outcome of this upcoming election turns out as it should, we should punish all the climate deniers, including the one that thinks he should be president. God almighty, God help us all. You know, I gotta be candid with you. This is going to be a difficult election. This is a difficult election. This guy is pandering to fat, middle-aged white guys who are worried about their jobs, to be blunt. And he's telling them things that he could never deliver on. And he doesn't tell them the things he's done, like trying to build a golf course in Dubai where he's paying people $1.50 an hour. And God help us should he become the president. We need through the Blue-Green Alliance. We're non-political. We're bipartisan. But we need to teach people to vote in their own interests and in the interests of their kids and their grandkids. And the interest of their kids and grandkids is not an environment where people are getting sick and their kids are getting sick because they're being lead poisoned by some Republican who changed where he should get the water from because it was going to save him a few bucks. That son of a bitch ought to be in jail. If we don't do it, who will? If the labor movement and the environmental movement can't create a bond, who will do it? History has told us they will play us off one against the other. They will tell us that if we do this, all these bad things will happen. And let me tell you, when I brag about my union having the first anti-pollution conference back in 1963 and supporting all kinds of legislation where we were told we'd lose jobs, most of you don't know anything about me. I grew up in a mining community called Sudbury, Ontario. Within 25 miles of where I grew up, there were no trees. No trees. And the reason there were no trees is the mining company did what they call open roasting, open hearth roasting. And what they would do is they would cut all the trees, put them on the ground, take all the ore, put it on top of the trees, get some more trees, put them on top of that, then they'd set fire to it. And when that would burn off, the impurities would blow off, and they'd go out onto the soil. Nothing could grow. When it rained, the rain would wash the soil away, and the rocks would be bare. And within 25 miles of the downtown, when you were driving in from east, west, north, or south, you came into an area that had no trees and all the rocks were black. And people thought, oh my God, black rocks. Take the first scrap off the rock and it was not black, it was all kinds of different colors. Our union, the Steelworkers Union, in 1967, made it a program that we went after the company on air pollution. We went after the company on water pollution. We went after the company on regreening the region. And today, if you drive into the community where I used to live, where, by the way, America sent men to practice walking on the moon because there was no vegetation. How would you walk in a place where there was no vegetation? Now, if you drive into that community within 25 miles, it's green, it's beautiful. We have 320 lakes within the city limits, and you can swim or fish in 310 of them. That was the role of the union. So when I say you look backwards to look forward, if we can do that through the labor movement and the environment movement in my hometown, if we can do that in a shithole like that, then we ought to be able to do it anywhere across North America. And then let me just close with a few more comments. The BlueGreen Alliance and some of the research we've done in working with the American Society of Civil Engineers, our infrastructure gets a D+. If we move the infrastructure from a D+ to a B, just think about that, that small move from a D+ to a B, that would create 2.7 million jobs. And what part of our infrastructure doesn't need to be rebuilt? I can still reflect, not long after the election cycle in 2010, I think it was, Carl Pope and I went to meet a number of new senators to explain to them the Blue-Green Alliance. And Carl Pope did something that has stuck with me since then. Carl pulls out his phone and he says to the senators, I could call China from here. And within a few seconds, I'd be connected in China, and it would sound like you were just down the street. And that's because our telecommunication systems are using the most modern, most efficient, most environmentally sound switching systems in the world. But if I put energy on the grid, and I try to move it a couple of 100 miles, I'll lose somewhere between 7% and 20% of the energy will be dissipated off that grid because it's inefficient, because it's going through all kinds of mechanical switching systems that are out of date. And as the utility workers would know, lots of those switching systems are 20, 30, and 40 years old. Just by taking that bit and modernizing the grid, we could literally create thousands of jobs, not just for utility workers, but for workers that make aluminum, workers that make steel, workers that make the wire, and we would save between 7 and 20% of the energy. What the hell else do you need to understand common sense? You can save the planet and you can create good jobs. You can do the same thing through buildings. I know that the glass company that we have collective agreements with that makes float glasses called for windows. They've now designed glass that keeps the energy, keeps the heat in the winter, in the cold, and keeps the cold in the summer with the air conditioning. And we could find new air conditioning systems and air handling systems. So just by repairing windows as we replace buildings and repairing air handling systems, we could manage to reduce energy, save carbon, and create jobs. How hard is it going to be after November? How hard will it be after November if we put our nose to the grindstone and elect and unelect climate deniers and elect people who want to rebuild America's infrastructure and know that by doing that we're creating a cleaner planet and we're creating good jobs? Who should stop us from investing and saying, okay, we're going to make a 20-year commitment to retrofit every building that's more than 35 years old? Why would we stop doing that? These are public buildings that should be using the most modern infrastructure tools. I can rattle on forever. In fact, some people accuse me of doing that. Let me close by telling you a little story. I get to travel quite a bit, and my kids are now all older, and I got grandkids. But when my two daughters were young, every time I traveled somewhere, I tried to bring them back a little trinket or a little something, so just, sort of a feeling, express my guilt maybe. And one time my oldest daughter said, Dad, we've got more T-shirts than we can ever wear. And so my next trip out, I thought I should get something different. So I happened to be in San Francisco, and I went walking around, and I found this gift shop. And I'm looking in the gift shop, and then there's this rat, brass rat in the window of the gift shop. And I look at it, and it looks like it's looking at me. And I move this way, I move that way, and each time I move it, the rat looks like he's still looking at me. And I thought this would make a neat doorstop at the kid's door so I could hold their door open and see what the hell's going on when the door's closed. So I went in and I saw the guy. sitting on a bench in there, the big grin, he had one of those funny goatees. I said, how much is the rat? He said, 25 bucks. I said, that's a pretty good deal. He said, the story's 250. I said, I don't want the story, I just want the rat. He said, well, you sure? I'll give you a deal. I said, no, I just want the rat. He said, okay, 25 bucks. I give him 25 bucks, I take the rat, and I start walking back to my hotel. I start walking back, and I hear, I look behind, there's a half a dozen rats chasing me. I figured, what the hell, this must be a bad area of town, I better move a little quicker. So I start moving quicker, and I hear more noise. I look behind, and there's now like 50 rats. Oh my God. I better hurry. So I start to run. So you know I was scared if I started to run. And I look behind, and there's like hundreds of rats. They're jumping on me, trying to bite my pant leg, going after my ankles. I concluded, they're not after me, they're after this rat. So I get by the bridge, and I just haul the rat, throw it as far as I can. It lands way out in the water, and the rats just jump off the bridge, and away they go in the water, and they all drowned. I figured, I better go back and see this old guy and tell him what happened. So I make my way back. There's this old guy sitting on the bench. I knew you'd be back. He said, you want the story, eh? I said, hell no. You got a brass Republican? Thank you all very much. Let's go change the world.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for indulging us for a few more minutes here. We have an exciting panel coming up. And I will say that the Blue-Green Alliance is really blessed with truly amazing leaders like Leo Gerard and his great story, which I had never heard before. And I'm honored to say that I'm also a product of one of his visionary collaborations. The Alliance for American Manufacturing is a partnership between the Steelworkers Union and some of USW's employers. And we fight for made in America and American manufacturing jobs. And I would say that together with the BGA, I believe we can get a lot done to invest in our workers and to rebuild our nation and to rebuild our infrastructure and our middle class. I don't have to tell you that the challenges that we face today are incredibly daunting, and you heard Leo articulate some of the political challenges that we face today. But I believe we can do this because this is a matter of possessing the know-how, possessing the will, possessing the way, but working on the will. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. We are a global superpower, yet we trail much of the developed world in clean power. Nearly 50 years ago, we put a man on the moon, yet we haven't yet put a high-speed rail train on the tracks in our country. We are a beacon of democracy around the world, and yet here at home, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for tens of millions of Americans is literally at risk because they lack access to clean water or good jobs, or both. We can do better. We must do better. And I know that when we put our collective focus on achieving the greater good, we can get it done. I would say that today, I think the patriotism of the red, white, and blue needs a little more blue and a little more green. This is a time when we can come together, as the Blue-Green Alliance has done incredibly successfully for the last 10 years, to rebuild America. Now, it will take a special kind of leadership to do this. And we will hear lots of stump speeches from the candidates from now until election time. And I would say it's a good thing to have them say the words we like about investing in workers, investing in America, and rebuilding our country, but it's only a great things if we can actualize their promises into results. And that's the task that faces us for the next 5 months. As the conference leaders have noted, it's not an easy journey. But today, let's get it started. We can't afford to wait. Our infrastructure is literally crumbling, and it is American manufacturing and American workers that can bring it back to the world standard it once was. This year, the world watched in horror as the crisis in Flint unfolded, and then again as the Congress incredibly and unbelievably stalled aid to its citizens to play party politics instead. But Flint is only one example around the country where our pipelines are leaking methane every day, and our water is contaminated with lead in scores of cities across the country, and our bridges are dilapidated and in some cases collapsing in every state. So, our concluding panel today will feature leaders in the effort to repair those basic systems, and they will talk about the strides being made to modernize infrastructure systems across the United States and how fixing those systems are creating family-sustaining jobs for hard-working Americans. Today on the panel, we have Michael Brune, the Executive Director of the Sierra Club, Michael Langford, the President of the Utility Workers Union of America, Mindy Lubber, the President of Ceres, and I'm proud to say that moderating this panel will be my friend Roxanne Brown, who is the Assistant Legislative Director of the United Steelworkers. Roxanne serves in the USW's DC office and focuses on a wide range of policy and regulatory issues, including defense, the environment, and energy, as well as domestic pulp and paper, the nuclear industry, shipbuilding, aluminum, cement, and specialty metals industries, and perhaps even those gift store rats. It sounds like Roxy covers it all. So I look forward to this great discussion. I thank you for your attention, and please welcome me in joining this great panel, welcoming this great panel and moderator. Roxy.
Thanks, Scott. So I don't know how to feel about the fact that we don't get intro music for our panel.
No love.
We almost boycotted.
See, we almost did. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this really, really important panel. And I really appreciate my friend Scott for that really kind introduction. We've heard a lot today about just how bad our infrastructure systems are throughout our country. And these systems are really important, not just for the day-to-day stuff that we all do, but they're really important for the health and safety of our communities. We've heard about Flint a lot today. And we saw very real world firsthand what happens when these systems fail and what that means. These systems are also really, really critical for the competitiveness of a lot of our nation's industries. Roughly 43 million tons of goods and products move through our roads and rails and ports and bridges every day. A lot of those products our members make. So despite how critical these systems are, as Leo said, we have a grade of what? What's our grade as a nation for our infrastructure? D+. The United States, the big world power, has a D+ grade for our infrastructure systems. So, you know, we're getting these reminders almost every single day about what that D+ grade looks like. We talked about Flint. Last July, the Tex Wash Bridge on Interstate 10 in California collapsed after a heavy rainstorm. A heavy rainstorm caused the collapse of this bridge. And in 2013, it was deemed structurally inefficient, which meant that it was not sufficient enough to do its task. So here's a bridge that a rainstorm took out was built in 1967, and it was deemed structurally inefficient, yet every single day, millions of people in California were traveling across it every day. So what does that mean? The Federal Highway Administration estimates that it would take roughly $170 billion a year to significantly improve the conditions of our roads and our bridges. $170 billion. You'll hear more about this from Mike Langford, but there are over 240,000 water main breaks each year. About 50% of our natural gas pipelines were constructed in the 1950s and 1960s, and some were built as far back as the 1800s. How many people heard about the explosion that took place in Harlem a few years ago? How old do you think the pipe was that caused the explosion? What year? Just yell it out. Not the utility workers, though. Anyone else? Yell it out. What year do you think it was? What? 1900. 1900? Do you want to give the answer?
Well, it's 127 years old, so reverse, subtract it. So I can't give you the year off the top of my head, but 127 years old, so think about it. That's what's in the ground.
So it's from the 1800s. And, these pipes are around a lot of our major cities, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Detroit, literally all across the country. We have pipes from the 1800s. We have bridges, built in the 1960s that are collapsing because of rain. We have a pipeline, our natural gas pipelines that are leaking methane and causing a significant danger to our communities. This is the infrastructure system that our nation is having to deal with every single day. So what we do know is that the U.S. is spending $450 billion less each year on infrastructure than it needs to. And as a result, we're missing out not just on safer communities and systems, but we're really missing out on a huge economic opportunity. Both Leo and Scott talked about the jobs benefits and what it means to make the component parts that go into these infrastructure systems. We're the steel workers. We make steel, but we also make cement, we make aluminum, we make glass, all of these components that can really play a very key role in our infrastructure systems, but we're not making the needed investments. And so we're having lapses not just in safety, but lapses in economics, because there are communities all across our country that can really benefit from the jobs that investments in these infrastructure systems could mean. So our panel this afternoon is going to dive a lot deeper into these issues, and I'm joined by Michael Brune, the Executive Director of the Sierra Club. Michael leads Sierra Club's more than 2.5 million members and supporters in their grassroots efforts to ensure a clean economy and environment. Also, Mike Langford, the National President of the Utility Workers Union of America. Under his leadership, the Utility Workers has committed to represent the interests of both the public and its workers to bring about long overdue national reform that will deliver safe, reliable, cost-effective, and environmentally friendly utility service across the country. And Mindy Lubber, the president of Ceres, a nonprofit organization that advocates for sustainable leadership. Mindy leads their effort to mobilize investors, companies, and public interest groups to accelerate and expand the adoption of sustainable business solutions to build a healthy global economy. So please join me in welcoming our first panel, our esteemed panel. And we're going to start with Mike. So Mike, what role should environmental organizations and environmentalists play in pushing for repairs to America's infrastructure systems and ensuring that these jobs are actual good jobs?
What role should we play?
Yeah.
I would say a powerful one. Mm-hmm. There's maybe three things. You can categorize the work that environmental groups are, or at least should be doing, into three different categories. This is at least how I think about it. The first is really easy, which is showing up. So if you're out there, if you're volunteering, or if you're a staff member of an environmental organization, or if you're members of an environmental organization, a big thing that we need to be doing in the environmental movement is showing up for our friends who are on the front lines fighting for workers' rights. So the Sierra Club is very proud to join the Fight for 15 movement and to support the work that was being done there. We're very proud to stand with communication workers and join them on the picket lines in their recent strike against Verizon. And I think it's important for all of us, regardless of what institution we're a part of or who we're representing, to not just accept an invitation, but to look for opportunities to be there and to show up with our bodies, with our voices, for all of our individual fights.
Right.
Second thing is maybe a little bit more difficult, which is how do we move beyond talking about infrastructure to actually advocating successfully for significant investments in our infrastructure, whether it's repairing and replacing water and gas pipelines or bridges or high-speed rail, as Scott was talking about earlier. We need to connect better to make sure that our work for infrastructure is effective and it's more strong than it currently is. And then the third thing, which is what I think our biggest challenge in the environmental movement is, we are in the process of transitioning off of fossil fuels towards clean energy. This will take decades. It's an intensive process. What is guaranteed is that clean energy will continue to get cheaper. It will become, in many cases, cheaper than most of the fossil fuels that are contributing to climate change. What is not guaranteed is whether or not those clean energy jobs will be good jobs, much less great jobs. And that is the main focus. That is our main challenge, I would say, as a community right now, is making sure that those clean energy jobs are good, high-road, family-sustaining jobs, whether it's in advanced batteries, whether it's in energy efficiency, in solar, in wind, making sure that if we're going to fight climate change, let's do it in a way that's effective and do it in a way that makes sure that the jobs that are being created can help workers to support their families. It's that third challenge that I think needs more attention.
Great, thanks, Mike. Mike Langford, we heard about what happened in the Northeast with Hurricane Sandy. What kind of lapses in our infrastructure systems are the frontline workers seeing when they're going to repair these systems?
Well, one thing that Sandy, the superstorm Sandy did, which you all see, that weather extremities seems to be getting worse all the time. I mean, you see what's happening in Texas and other states as we speak with the rains and the floods. It showed that the utility industry is pretty vulnerable to this type of weather conditions. And Sandy, not only did it knock out thousands and thousands of utility poles, but as it uprooted trees, it pulled gas lines out of the ground, water lines out of the ground. So you could see the whole utility infrastructure was really turned upside down. There was literally hundreds of thousands of people without power, gas, water, and those are essentials of life, to sustaining life. And so our folks see this stuff firsthand all the time, because the women and men of the utility workers, they operate and maintain all of generation, gas, electric, water, via nuclear, coal, renewables, and they also operate and maintain our infrastructure, our distribution and transmission systems. But they see the vulnerability and the lack of actual new technology being put into place here. So our folks have a unique perspective. They're also consumers of that product. They live in the communities, and it's important to them to rebuild these communities and to be a part of that. So as we move forward, there's a lot of opportunity, because you've heard from a lot of people here today about the crumbling systems, and the system we heard was rated at a D+. Well, electric's rated at a D+, natural gas is at a D, and water and wastewater is at a D-. So you see, it's not all equal. And there's a lot of room for improvement here. And it's just, I say this all the time, is that a lot of us in this room here probably will spend $150 to $250 for 1,000 TV channels we may watch a half a dozen of. But we should really think about, would it be that much more difficult to invest a little bit more into these systems to provide clean water, clean, safe, environmentally friendly energy, and natural gas? So we really need to put a different perspective on how we finance and how we look at these things. And the utility workers, again, they are the first line of defense. They're your first responders. They repair, they cut the power, they cut the water, they cut the gas, they rebuild it through all aspects of the entire rebuilding process. So our folks are there, and I mean, it's an important role that they play. And we just have to keep pushing, and through state levels, through public service commissions, demand a federal energy policy. There's a lot we can do, and that's another discussion. So.
Thanks, Mike. Mindy, you work a lot with business leaders and investors every single day. Are they concerned about the state of our infrastructure and just climate change in general and what that means?
So the answer is yes. That's an easy answer, and of course everything has nuances and complications. Let me put a few things in perspective. One is this argument that we're talking about of how to build infrastructure is about some of the greatest risks and opportunities that we face as a world community. Think about it. Many of us, representing you and others, were in Paris for the climate talks. And the climate talks came out with the conclusion that we have got to get to a 2-degree world, which of course scientists could describe what all that means. But to get to a 2-degree world by 2050, we need to be investing around $1 trillion a year to build the world economy and the energy future that we want. To address the water issues that you just talked about, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year. We could throw around numbers for the rest of the afternoon until eternity, but the bottom line is we have never been in a situation where we have a bigger or more formidable opportunity to build our economy, to create jobs, and to create a future that is not a fossil fuel future, that does not allow for our children to have what we have. It is a unique moment in time. Now, of course, the issue, as Mike talked about it, is how do we create that future, and where are the jobs, and how do we make sure that when we're manufacturing solar panels or wind turbines or preparing all the materials for them, that those jobs are good jobs for United States labor force and in other countries for their labor force at reasonable salaries to allow people to support families and build a future for their families. And I think that is the key. I want to say one other thing before coming back to this. I've spent the last 35, 37 years in the environmental movement as an advocate trying to pass legislation, as a litigator suing polluters, as a regulator running the EPA regional office where we were responsible for enforcing all the federal laws for all of the New England states, and brought world-changing litigation. And everything was about the good and the bad, and we'll sue you and we'll go after you. I think at this moment in time, we need to think a little bit differently, and not because I'm Pollyanna thinking if we all hold hands in this world, we could get along and go along and get to nirvana. I wish I could say that was the case. But nobody could have imagined BlueGreen being as successful as it is 20 years ago. It was labor and it was environmentalists. And the brilliance of bringing together the Blue-Green Alliance, of which I'm proud to sit on the board of, built bridges, not the kind of infrastructure bridges, but built bridges that should have been built 100 years ago, that were essential to moving forward. And frankly, it's an alliance that I think came too late, but it came, and it's extraordinary, and it is about a shared set of interests. And anyone who wants to tell you that what's good for the environment is bad for the economy, or what's good for the environment is bad for workers, obviously is living under a rock or in a prior world. So Roxy asked me the question, what about businesses and investors, with whom I spend a lot of time? Frankly, 95% of my time, everywhere from corporate boardrooms to the trustee meetings of the largest public pension funds and the leadership of large investment houses and businesses. And this is a moment in time, and I don't think there is perfect alliance. But everybody, whether you're an investor or a business person, an environmentalist or a labor person, understands we need to build our infrastructure, understands both the risk of climate change, which frankly, anyone who thinks it's a Republican versus a Democrat issue, an East Coast versus a West Coast, a red state versus a blue state, is not seeing the world correctly. And we know there are doubters and deniers. I'm not missing that point. But we have got to change this debate of climate change and, frankly, the future of our economy and our workers to be about the future of our children. It is not about Republicans versus Democrats. I know of nobody who would not throw themselves in front of a bus if we're coming straight at their kids. The bus of climate change is barreling in front of us, and frankly, whether you've got an R or a D and you're a blue state or a red state, you need to stand up, you better stand up, and you better get ready to stop it. We're not all there yet, but on infrastructure, on whether or not we need roads that could carry our products, transportation. I know of 5 companies who want to double the weight that their trucks carry because they want to send out fewer trucks. They want to save energy. And they've been told by different highways and bridges they can't drive those trucks over them because they're not equipped to handle the weight because they were built 100 years ago and nobody knew how to build them right, or they're deteriorating. Frankly, whether you're a business person or investor, climate change, the impacts of it, infrastructure, and what it means to our future has an impact. And there is no business, and there is no investor, and there are no workers or environmentalists who want to see what we saw in Flint, who believe that the water shortages in California, where we've not only raised the price of agriculture, put farm workers out of business and sent them home where they can't support their families, we're seeing the kind of problems by ignoring the core basic infrastructure. So despite the fact that the fossil fuels are always going to oppose us, ExxonMobil is not going to get up and say, I'm right there with you, Mike Brune, next week. But there are companies who we are bringing into state houses and state legislatures all across this country to say we need clean energy standards or renewable portfolio standards. We need a clean power plan. We need to invest in renewables. And we're seeing more and more of that. Do we need to organize more of them? Without question. But we have got to get to a point where everybody realizes the risk of ignoring our infrastructure and the risk of not taking advantage of the several $trillion a year of opportunity is one we can't afford to squander. So I think part of what we need to do in walking out of here is find where we have common ground, make it clear that if the labor community is out making sure that we have the right laws in place for a clean energy future, that the minimal thing we could do is make sure that the jobs or the right jobs go into the right community for the right reasons. So the short or the long answer is, I think there's common ground, not on every issue, and certainly not on fossil fuels and certain things, where we could build an alliance that's even broader than what we've done with BlueGreen around some of these infrastructure issues. And if we choose one or two, and water is a great place to start, and go at it with a vengeance in the United States Congress, despite how insane that situation has been, that we've got a shot at it, and we ought to figure out how to organize a broader constituency of investors, of businesses, of labor, and the environmental community.
Thanks, Mindy. Mike, so Mindy talked a lot about how important the alliance between our 2 organizations was that led to this wonderful alliance that we have. And one of our main tenets is the fight against climate change. Mm-hmm. Why is updating our infrastructure so important to helping to fight climate change?
Well, it's clear. So if you're talking about infrastructure, and updating infrastructure, you're talking about efficiency. Right. So regarding energy efficiency, that is the first and best source of energy production in any state in the country. Energy efficiency, updating our energy infrastructure means every building, every factory, every home has an opportunity to save money, cut energy use, and create jobs at the same time. It is as sliced bread as an issue can possibly get. Same thing is true, of course, when we're talking about energy efficiency in our transportation sector, but also updating our energy infrastructure and investing, again, in the high road jobs in the clean energy space. In California, a study just came out that talked about when we merge very aggressive clean energy standards to get to 50% clean energy by 2030 with high road employment practices, what we have seen is 10,000 jobs in the state of California in the clean tech sector with an average salary of $78,000. That's a good start for where we want to go. Other thing I want to add to this, it's I think that since we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary, and since this is the last panel of the day, I think you all deserve a moment of candor, which is I don't think that we're really going all in. I don't think that as a community we're attacking this with a vengeance, frankly. I would bet that for each of the Blue-Green Alliance's 10 years, there was a conversation about upgrading our infrastructure, guaranteed. And I would bet for 85% of panelists and panels, throughout all of the 10 years of the Blue-Green Alliance, there was some mention of we have to increase our investment in energy efficiency, water, gas pipelines, whatever it might be. I don't think as a community, if we're being honest with ourselves, we have the focus that we need, and I don't think that we have brought our potential to bear on any one of these issues. I agree with what Mindy just said, that if we were to focus, let's say, on water, or on gas, or on energy efficiency, or some combination of the above, and we all dedicated a significant amount of time and attention and passion and tenacity and creativity to this, we could probably create a different breakthrough than we've been able to. And I would say that this is a time for us to challenge ourselves to address this issue in a different way over the next 10 years than we have over the past 10 years. Who else needs to be in this room? Who should be at this conference that isn't normally? Who should be a part of our coalitions that might not be a part? Who needs to be at the table? Where can we build power? Where can we apply power? How do we address some of the underlying obstacles that we currently face? Because if we want to take the issue seriously, we have to take ourselves seriously, which is to do things in a different way than how we've been doing them over the last couple of years.
Thanks, Mike. Mike Langford, one of the issues that we are taking really, really seriously is updating our natural gas pipelines because of just how dangerous methane emissions are in helping to kind of aid climate change and the effects of it. What are the challenges and the opportunities that exist around upgrading our systems?
Well, there's really no challenges to upgrading the system. I mean, if you look at our natural gas pipelines, again, you know, you heard earlier from some of the other speakers that there's wooden gas pipes in the ground. You know, and you heard the pipeline explosion was, that pipe in the ground in Harlem was 127 years old. You look at Aliso Canyon, which leaked methane, I forget how many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons of methane literally into the atmosphere, which is approximately 60 times worse than carbon dioxide, which comes from coal burning power plants. And that was an old oil well that they converted into a storage facility, which was actually built in the 40s. The opportunity to create several 100,000 jobs just in repairing this. I mean, and these are good jobs. These are skilled jobs. I mean, the UA does a lot of that work. We do a lot of that work. So there's multiple unions that do that work, and it's not make-believe work. It's jobs that are there, and jobs that could be created actually tomorrow. Some states are taking it a little more aggressively, and a lot of states and utilities, they have like a 30 to 40-year plan. Well, that's ridiculous. We should expedite this to make it no more than 10 years. And there's where you could literally put hundreds of thousands of people to work. You have low interest rates, what not at a better time to finance projects like this through a variety of ways, infrastructure banks we talk about. So there's really no downside, no challenge to this. It's all on an upside is what we could really do in this whole fight against the methane leakage. And you know, we're having nuclear plants prematurely shut down because of the low price of natural gas. And they're replacing them with gas plants. Well, gas plants create carbon. Nuclear plants has zero carbon. So we're actually going backward when it comes to reducing that carbon footprint. So we need to really think this thing through a little bit, not put all of our eggs in one basket either, because methane, or not methane, but natural gas is cheap right now, but you all know that it's not going to stay cheap forever. You know, in Europe right now, it's about 5 times higher than it is here in the US, and the marketers are just dying to start selling it to Europe. So, you know, once it starts going around the globe, the price is going to go up. And there's other competition for this natural gas. So, actually, I don't see any downside. I don't see any challenges. The challenges is getting people, like Michael said, you know, we've been talking about this for years. But how do we get the right people in the room? How do we get people to say enough's enough? Because what we lose through leaky pipes equates to about 120 million automobiles a year. Think about that. That's just unaccounted gas going up into the atmosphere. There's a lot of leaks out there that if they don't create any imminent danger, it's just methane spewing into the atmosphere. We've had some spots where it's for years. It is actually in California. So, you know, things are changing, but it's not changing quickly enough, and we really need to up the ante here and really hold people's feet to the fire, literally, to the fire. So.
Thanks, Mike. So Mindy, how can businesses help do what Mike Langford is talking about? How can they help to kind of drive and spur the investments in our energy and our water systems?
You know, people do what's in their interests. And there is no business that does not have an interest in safe roads, safe communities, non-leaking methane, non-leaking water. I mean, these things are costing us billions of dollars a year. I know of no business that can run a manufacturing facility, frankly, run their business without a certainty that when they need water, they're going to have water. You know, the Gap, Levi Strauss, other apparel companies, drought in California, drought in Texas, drought elsewhere meant cotton crops dying. All of the issues that we're talking about, whether it's infrastructure or related to water, related to our energy systems, they are in most cases, and there's always special interests, and that will always be the case. We've got a shared interest when it comes to infrastructure. And the United States Congress needs to hear from us and state legislatures that we are aligned. I will tell you, and I don't know, I'm not suggesting this is good or bad. When we bring dozens of large businesses who are also employers, good ones and bad ones, we'll have to go through the list, but into state legislatures and say, and into the Congress, we want a price on carbon, we want a clean power plan, we want renewable portfolio standards. For some reason that triggers, well, this must be good for the economy, because it is good for the economy. We need to be able to stand together. We need to be able to find the businesses who will stand with us saying rotting and decaying roads and bridges is bad for their economy and their business. We need the shareholders of those companies. We need to get the investors in every renewable energy company to come with us and sit with those renewable energy companies and talk about why those jobs have to be union jobs and why those jobs have to be fair paying jobs. It is not only that we have new solar power and new wind power in the United States, and we do. And the price has come down significantly and it's competitive with fossil fuels, if not better. That is a great start, but those jobs have to work for the people in this room and our labor force around the country to be able to build communities. And we can do that. We haven't done that. We have not looked at who is every investor in every renewable energy company, because most of those people want what you all want. So I'm with Mike. I'm with both Mikes. There's more we could do. We ought to commit to doing it now. We ought to not commit to doing the impossible, not take on every issue, but take on one. And frankly, whether it is renewable energy facilities, whether it's water, they are desperately needed, and they happen to be in the interests of communities, of labor, of environmentalists, and of the private sector. Let's test one. Let's see if we could get into the room. 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when we talked about BlueGreen, nobody thought we'd get into the room, let alone build an alliance and a force that is making the kind of difference BlueGreen has made. Let's test that. We don't have to get into bed and be married forever, but take one area and go at it with a vengeance. We could do it. I'm with Mike. We haven't done it. And it's up to us to give that a shot.
So to build that out a little bit, how do we galvanize people? And this is to you, Mike Brune. How do we galvanize people to do just that? Because we had the crisis in Flint. It was egregious. The public was completely shocked. There was outcry. You have sick children. You know, you heard this morning from President Haidt about, people losing their hair. It was a very, very significant community health event. Yet Congress really didn't do anything to fund the crisis. And there was outcry from the American public, but just to a small degree. That would be one way.
Yeah.
But how do we galvanize the American public to actually do something on infrastructure in a real way?
Sure. Well, it is a crisis.
Yeah.
It's not. This is not an issue that has been resolved in any sense. There hasn't been justice or accountability for Snyder or others who have been involved, or full accountability at least.
That's right.
The suffering hasn't been alleviated in Flint itself. The underlying governance structure, the emergency manager law, hasn't been addressed effectively. And the problems of race, certainly throughout the state and across the country, hasn't been dealt with effectively either. I think that the challenge for us, whether it's Flint or for any one issue that we pick, it's part of the challenge is making a commitment to identify something as a priority collectively and to put real resources into it over the long term so that we can be, when each of our organizations, when we have a priority, let's say for those of us who are working to stop TPP, we dedicate ourselves to it. Or for those of us who are working to enact some piece of climate legislation, we focus on it until we get the job done. But what we're not yet doing to the scale of which is needed is to collectively identify a single priority and then collectively to put our resources on that priority and be as tenacious and persistent as we are when we're doing our best work. In Flint, the story that we heard over lunchtime was inspiring. It was great. Many of our institutions showed up to Flint, even if we didn't have a presence there. Many of us put some resources into it, but it didn't have the highest level coordination and the urgency that was required to deal with a very challenging and difficult situation. That is what we're going to need if we're going to graduate from a D+ to a B, as Leo was saying and as we've heard today. It'll take a higher level, order of magnitude level of coordination and emphasis in order to actually prevail.
Thanks, Mike. And just again, to continue along that vein, so clearly Congress is not doing much in the infrastructure space, but a lot of state and local governments are. And there are communities who are pushing on their governments to make some upgrades. And I know, Mike, that your union has worked really closely with utilities in states like New Jersey and New York to try to push for some of these investments. So will we be seeing more of that happening as the years go forward, more state and local focus on these investments versus federal?
Well, I think it has to be all the above, because as we move forward in this, I mean, obviously the whole energy industry, gas, electric, and water, it's under the microscope. That's all that's discussed and talked about. Fossil plants or coal plants are shutting down, and it's not because of EPA, it's because of the low price of natural gas. You have nuclear plants, like I said, closing down, and we have to have some sort of just transition, not only for those workers in these facilities, but for the communities also. These communities were thriving on these jobs, so we should look at building stuff in America. Steel being built in China produces about 3 to 4 times more carbon. If we build that steel in these communities that are losing these coal-burning power plants, or building renewables such as wind generators and solar capacity, that would really build up that community. You could transition workers into that. So you see, we can't just abandon the communities and the workers at the same time. So federally, that needs to be stepped up. You heard Sherrod Brown saying he's going to introduce some legislation. That's a step in the right direction. But state and locally, they could do more than what they're doing also. We have public service commissions in every state, and they should be mandating to these utilities. We should almost look at a re-regulation aspect to force them to do. The only way you're going to reduce carbon is by utility scale wind and utility scale solar and renewables. You're not going to do it with all this distributed generation. They're here today, they're gone tomorrow. And if it's mandated and it's paid for, let's face it, folks, if there's not a way to pay for this stuff and a way for them to guarantee some sort of revenue, it's not going to happen. And we're risking ourselves with national security by not having a secure electric and gas and water system in this country. It's craziness at this point in time. And that's where state and local, federal, all of the above needs to step up to the plate here. And again, we can't offshore this stuff because we're just shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic, as they say. If you're producing 4 times more carbon in China, it's not doing any good. It's just adding to it. Clean coal technology is something we should be the leader in. And we should be selling that to China and to India because they have a lot of brand new coal burning plants. They may be the state of the art, but they're still producing a lot of CO2 out there. And they're not going to stop just because we are, unless we can help with the technology and help with that. So,
So Mindy, how do we fund this stuff? How do we fund the massive investments in infrastructure, but then also efficiency? Because there's been a bit of a theme on efficiency here too. How do we fund that?
Right. Well, given the numbers we're talking about, there's no doubt we're going to need private and public funding. There is no way to do it with one versus the other only. The second thing I want to say is there's enormous capital out there, and the capital is not meeting the problems. I mean, we've got enormous pots of capital, people saying we want to invest in clean energy. We've got unlimited opportunities for clean energy investments, many of which could be in places where there's an extraordinary need, both here and in India and other places, and we're not finding the match. So there's a Jewish word, yenta, or something, a matchmaker. We need to get smarter about matching capital with projects, and I think that's it. But the bottom line is we can't get away from the fact that we have got to get this out of some political frame that D's like it and ours don't. The inordinate amount of money that has to go into things like rebuilding our bridges, rebuilding our water pipe system. Much of that is going to be federal taxpayer dollars. It's probably one of the best expenditures we can make. That's where the deep pockets are, substantially more resources that we're paying into it. So I think we can't ignore the fact that we need to have the federal government in line with the needs as we understand it. And you asked both Mikes, you asked what's next. I mean, I do want to challenge ourselves to, in the next 3 months, sit down, determine the 1 or 2 most important infrastructure plays, and bring together a whole different group of people around the table. Not 100, but a group of 15 of the largest investors in the public sector, public pension funds, who are all saying, we've allocated $5 billion for infrastructure, but we're not finding the right projects. Well, let's help them find the right projects. Let's have people who are part of the economy, some of the problems and some of the solutions sitting at that. It is in nobody's interest to have roads crumbling. It is nobody's interest to have another Flint. Frankly, I don't believe GM and Ford liked it, and I pull them out only because they're in Detroit or nearby, any more than we liked it. When you see a community suffer and crumble and the kind of atrocity that took place there, that's not good it's clearly not good for families and the economy. It's not good for communities. So we need to take 1 or 2 of these issues that are in everybody's interest to address. We may have different nuanced ways, and sit down and look at them and figure out how we make alliance on something that's infrastructure related between environmentalist unions, business, and investors. And something else we need to do for all of the new renewable energy companies that we have helped prosper, and that's great. We need to build the clean energy future. We have fought for laws. We have gotten them passed. There are many more that we're fighting for. Those companies need to be looking at what kind of jobs they're offering, and that hasn't happened. And I think there's lots of opportunity there. If labor has gone the great lengths of making sure those industries have the right glide path, the right environment for coming into play, and pass the right laws to make it possible, then we've got an obligation to make sure that those companies are looking at the jobs in a way that serves this community. So 2 quick examples, whether we come together around an infrastructure or around even the renewable energy community, and how to make sure it is about the right kind of jobs. I think there's opportunities, and we ought to report back to you a year from now that we've at least tried. We focused, we tried, we brought our resources together, and we've got a plan for moving forward.
Thanks, Mindy. And you actually answered the last question. We have time for one more question, but you answered your portion of the last question that I have. All of you have talked about the fact that we need to pull other voices and other people to the table on these fights. And this is a room of allies and people who have pretty significant networks. So if there was one group that you would recommend bringing to the table, who would that be? Mindy, you mentioned investors and other economic groups. Mike Langford or Mike Brune, who would you guys bring to the table? Go ahead, Mike. You first.
Well, let me just quickly, Leo had mentioned, or I just want to make this correction there, and I want to take Leo a little bit further back in time. he had mentioned, and I don't mean to make it sound any worse, but it is worse. The water situation, he mentioned 1 billion. And 1 billion is a lot, but it's actually 7 billion gallons of water we lose every day. Not 1 billion, but 7 billion. It's between 6.5 and 7. So think about that. So he was going back to 1 billion years or whatever. Well, you can go back 7 billion to see where that takes you, huh? Who else would I have in the room? I think this morning you heard Perez speak, Secretary Perez, and he really got the facts about the leaky water pipes and methane this morning when we were discussing. And we talk to the DOE all the time. I think we need to get all these agencies together so that they're all hearing and seeing and feeling the same thing and realizing that there has to be something has to be done here. And to the public, I think we need more public outcry, because the only way you're going to get something done, I mean, we're singing to the choir in here, right? You know? We need to really get this message out, and that's what we've been trying to do through BlueGreen and through the utility workers and others. It's about rebuilding America and repairing America. And these are important issues. If we want to be the leader of the world, we can't have a third world gas, electric, and water system. It's just not going to work. And so I'm saying that we put a message together. All the different agencies in government needs to hear this message. All the Senate, all the House, and everybody in between and outside of that. We can't just stop within these walls. It has to be a public outcry.
Thanks, Mike. Mike.
Yeah, so I appreciated what both my fellow panelists have said. And Mindy, I would certainly agree with you that bringing on both investors but also the renewable energy industry is key to this. If we've been successful in our advocacy over the last several decades at creating great tax policy incentives and renewable portfolio standards to make the market for their products for several decades, clearly we have an opportunity to talk about what the next several decades will look like and the labor practices that will be needed if those industries are going to continue to get our support. On top of that, I would say we have an opportunity to bring in more of the civil rights community. You know, both the NAACP, National Council of La Raza, I think would be key parts of a coalition like this. And I also think that there's probably an opportunity to focus on mayors across the country, because these are folks who are the most bipartisan, I would say, of any elected official at any level across the country. You don't have that much of an opportunity to be dogmatic and stuck in an ideology when you've got basic services that have to be provided on an hourly basis. And so I think that there's a great opportunity for us when it comes to upgrading our infrastructure and breaking through the political morass that we're in to partner with mayors across the country.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all, and everyone please join me in thanking this panel. You did a great job.
Thank you.
And now you have your freedom. I think Kim was going to say some words, and you have your freedom. So thank you all.
Well, thank you to that last panel that spoke. I was really compelled to hear what they had to say, and a lot of good ideas were generated just in that short time of discussion. And I was sort of thinking to myself, if there was anything that comes out of the Blue-Green Alliance conference that we had here in Cleveland, is us getting to know each other a little bit better. And my hope in the days and the weeks ahead is that people continue connecting with one another and talking about these issues. I mean, I was just thinking of whether we're talking about the Flint crisis or what happened with Hurricane Sandy, years ago. It takes a major disaster, a major catastrophe, a major political egregiousness in order to get everybody's attention on some of these issues. And it shouldn't be that way. I mean, why are we spending the last few months figuring out if Flint is going to get aid? Who's not calling their legislator? Why is their legislator going up for re-election and that this is not such a major issue? That should be done, okay? And that's what we can unite in this room. And if there are people that are not in this room, but that you interact with everywhere else, I think you need to help us start this conversation, because there's got to be more people in this room and beyond this room across the United States demanding action to be taken. So I was really pleased to hear the ideas that they had. I thought bringing in the business community, talking amongst, bringing in the civil rights leadership and talking about these things on a local and a national level is necessary to get us to the economy. And I think everyone in this room probably agrees with a lot of the recommendations presented throughout this conference related to infrastructure. And thank you, Cleveland, and thank you for all the participants here who have spent time with us today. Our day is not over yet. We actually have a reception this evening at 6:30. It is outside here in the lobby area, so we hope to see you there and we can continue the conversation. I also want to thank several people that have volunteered their time today and over the last few days in helping us plan this conference, as well as our conference manager for the BlueGreen Alliance, Erin Kelly, who this is her last conference. She is leaving the BGA staff, so I want to really thank her for all her work. We also had a lot of logistics coordinators on our staff. Jen and Linda have been working night and day planning this conference for the last 6 months, as well as the rest of the BGA staff who've been on hand over the last few days and weeks leading up to this conference. I also want to thank our partner organizations. Thank you. Thank you for getting the word out, spreading the word, and getting attendees here to the conference. I also want to thank the wonderful sponsors that made this conference possible. I hope that you took away from this conference tools to start to make more productive conversations that need to happen here in America to get us to the world-class infrastructure we were once known for. I thank you for starting these conversations, for drawing attention to these issues, and for everything that you do. I look forward to working together to make our vision for a cleaner environment and stronger economy a reality. Again, I hope to see everyone at 6:30 this evening. For those who signed up for a tour tomorrow, it's very important that folks meet at 8 a.m. in the lobby, so I'm giving that public service announcement. And again, thank you for your energy for the last day, and really appreciate you spending the time with us. Thank you, Cleveland.